My name is Jeffrey Hill. I'm executive chair of the Satellite Show in DC and also executive editor of Via Satellite Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 16 of our Future Space Economy webcast series titled Space Situational Awareness in an Era of Weaponized Space. This episode is sponsored by Kepler, building the internet in space. So thank you so much, Kepler. They've been our sponsor throughout the year, and we appreciate their support. As the title alludes to, we're going to talk about what space situational awareness does in an era or in an environment where you have significant threats happening in space. And I know that in the description, which I clearly wrote around the time Russia was talking about, developing nuclear weapons for space, because I could see that. I said, we're going to talk about the hypothetical situation that a spacefaring nation breaks the space treaty of 1967, brings nuclear weapons into space. That's just one of many situations that we're going to discuss throughout the next hour. That might not even be the most immediate threat to space assets that need our attention. And we have two very, very, very intelligent people that have joined us today as guest speakers. And I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Senjuti Mallick. She's a business operations manager at COMSPOC. She has a career and expertise spanning strategic advisory, risk management, technology, law and policy, and international relations. She represents COMSPOC on a long list of prominent industry organizations. She previously served on the ITU's emerging tech division, consulted in the telecoms industry, and taught international law at Harvard Law School's Oxbridge program. Senjuti, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. Could you just tell us a little bit about your work in the space situational awareness, space sustainability arena, just so our attendees get to know who you are?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me here. This is very exciting, and I'm really happy to be sharing this floor with Jeff, you, and of course, Tatiana here. So this is great. And just thank you so much for the introduction as well. COMSPOC is where I work, and I'm here, as Jeff said, as the business operations manager. In the past, done several hats with marketing and strategic partnerships, etc., and also leading the legal and compliance teams. We are basically a commercial provider for space situational awareness software solutions. Our solutions deliver capabilities that characterize and protect space objects. So essentially, what our softwares enable organizations to do is to operate a secure and safe SSA system that can produce actionable analyses. So our major products are, of course, the SSA software suite, which is off the shelf and enterprise level. And then there's Space Event Generator, there's threat assessment, orbit determination, and the latest one, which we have, and it's online, it's over the internet, and it's free. It's called Spacebook, which is very exciting. And if anybody wants to ever go check it out, you can. It essentially enables you to download and visualize space data, right from TLEs to satellite catalog files, space weather, etc. It's in short, we call it the Wikipedia for space. Over to you, Jeff. I'm happy to talk more.
Oh, and we will. Thank you so much, Senjuti. Right away, an example of collecting this data and how it's being shared. And we'll get more into that throughout the discussion. We are also joined today by Tatiana Sainati. She is a partner at the Wiley Rein firm, a highly respected litigator, so respected, in fact, she was named to DCA Live's DC's Power Women of Law list for 2024. Congratulations, Tatiana. She brings a deep understanding of international, comparative, and human rights to assist clients with legal matters involving investments in emerging markets, space and satellite technology, renewable energies, and the healthcare sector. She previously served as a legal advisor on the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal in The Hague, and as a law clerk at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. It covers California and the entire West Coast. Tatiana, great to have you here. Same question. I mean, I went over some of your previous work here, but what brings you to this space situational awareness discussion, and talk about some of your work in this arena.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wiley has a long and historic practice in the space and satellite areas. I keep wanting to say the space, but that sounds very redundant. And that includes like partners who help negotiate the ITSO treaty, negotiating the privatization of Intelsat back when it was, an international organization and then became a private entity. And we routinely advise clients operating from large market players to increasingly a number of startups who are involved in space exploration, space exploitation, both in terms of their compliance, in terms of their regulatory practices, and representing them before various agencies in the United States, Europe, Australia. And increasingly, we've been focusing on disputes, which is where my practice comes in. It's as we'll be getting into in the course of this discussion, this is kind of the frontier. And anytime you're operating in a frontier, the rules can be kind of squishy. And so understanding what are the parameters in which you're operating if and when a dispute arises can be challenging. And because I have this practice working in emerging markets, space is just an emerging market. And a lot of the lessons learned from other emerging markets where I've had my past practice have been really helpful in navigating those issues that are coming up in space. And that includes actually handling one of the only satellite arbitrations that's been conducted to date. So we've actually been able to see how, analogizing from lessons learned in other areas can be really helpful to navigating disputes in space.
That's fascinating. And as we've mentioned just in our introductions here, this discussion, we're going to cover, not only just why SSA is important, and not only how we're collecting and distributing data, but more importantly, what do we do with that data when it's really important to make a decision with that data, when the situation requires critical thinking, decision making on the spot. So with that said, we're going to start our discussion. Before we do, though, now that you all know our speakers, I want to encourage everyone in the audience watching to really help us drive this discussion. And you can do that by asking us questions. And you can submit your questions through the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen here on the interface. You'll send them to us. No one else will see your question. And I will ask those questions for you. I won't reveal who you are or what company you work for to make you very comfortable asking any question that you may have. I have questions for our speakers, but really we want you to learn from this and to, if we need to go more in depth on a specific question. If you have questions about anything specific, we want to hear from you. And I don't wait until the very end. So please submit those questions as soon as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as we can in the hour. So, use that Q&A tab on the right-hand side. So I'll start with you, Senjuti. Let's kind of establish a foundation here. Why is space situational awareness critical in today's crazy mixed up world? Why is this so important with where space development is today?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's an excellent question. And I think we all talk about SSA, but sometimes it's just, we forget why the context is as to why it becomes important. So I'm so glad that you asked it. Just to lay the foundation here, to me, or just generally, what is SSA? It's essentially the monitoring and prediction of objects located in space. And why is it important? The short answer is because it's vital for enhancing transparency and security in the space environment. Just to give an example, Space Foundation's report for this year, 2023, showed that the global space economy reached a whooping 570 billion, if I'm not wrong. And then just in the first half of 2023, there were over 2,600 objects that were launched into outer space, which was a 500% increase in the last 5 years. Then, of course, we have, 120 million pieces of debris. Most of them are inactive. then there is like 14,000 satellites in lower Earth orbits. So putting all these facts and figures into place here, we can actually see that humankind is actually reliant on space by leaps and bounds, which essentially makes the entire space a shared environment, but it's also extremely vulnerable. Without a robust SSA, we are at a risk of a catastrophic collisions that can lead to like a domino effect, more popularly known as the Kessler syndrome, which will obviously render orbits to be unusable. So this basically leads to this to a situation where SSA, which Space Situational Awareness, is a cornerstone to the larger domain and concept of space sustainability. And with a robust SSA, we are able to like monitor and mitigate debris, and like obviously do lots of other things that we'll be discussing through the course of the discussion. But it enables us to have a space that is safe, secure, and accessible to generations yet to come forever. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Senjuti. Tatiana, from your perspective, why is SSA critical? And also speak to like, how have we averted major disasters? We've had some incidences of collision, we've had debris creation, we've had anti-satellite weapon tests, but why is it so critical today, and what do we need to do?
Well, I think Senjuti really nailed this in her answer. Part of why it's so critical today is because there are just more objects in space. We're making increasing use of space, and correspondingly, as societies, we're increasingly reliant on all those objects that are orbiting the Earth up there in space for our daily lives, for our communications, for our healthcare, for monitoring the weather, just for like everything. I know I'm not touching on a lot of the ways in which our reliance on space, I guess, a lot of the ways in which we've become reliant on space. So that makes it critically important that we can depend on those space objects, on those space technologies, on those satellites. And we can't do that if the orbits become unusable. We can't do that if there's a collision. I think as the risk of a catastrophic collision or something similar increases, there's a related and follow-on risk of how do these disputes end up getting resolved, because there will be disputes especially if private or important public assets are damaged as a result of a collision. And so how is that dispute going to get resolved, and how can it be resolved in a way that is both efficient and sets a good precedent, right, for the resolution of future disputes? We frequently say as lawyers that bad facts can make really bad law. And so that's one of the things that, keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about these things, is like, oh, if the first case that gets resolved, if the first like decision or decisions in these areas, it's based on a really bad set of facts or some really bad actors, we could end up with really bad precedent that will then just end up getting relied upon and will be extremely hard to overturn just because of how lawyers and judges think. So I think those are some of the reasons why it's important to be really thoughtful about avoiding the incidents in the first place, and be really thoughtful about how we want to respond to them when they, realistically, inevitably will happen.
Absolutely. Staying on you, Tatiana, before I go to that question, when you said like setting bad precedent, like how many people in the legal community have the authority to establish well-informed precedent? Like, it's like the Wild West up there, right? But I mean, how many, like in what courtroom do you want to be in when these decisions are being made?
Well, I think you want to be, ideally, like if I could design my hypothetical, this would be the ideal situation in which to resolve one of these issues. I would probably want to have a tribunal. I would want it in arbitration, and I would want to be able to call on experts like Senjuti and some others who really understand the industry and some of the peculiarities of space, and have been thinking about a lot of these issues and have them as the decision makers. So in fact, I wouldn't be in, and this is with all, due respect to courts in the United States, courts in other jurisdictions around the world, I think it would be extremely helpful to have those initial opinions or initial decisions made by individuals who have a deep understanding of space and some of the particular complexities that result from operating in space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so let's outline some of these threats and talk about what are some of the more immediate threats that require immediate action, and what are some of these long-term threats that we need to start establishing the precedent now, right, to deal with them so we're not caught by surprise. So some of the physical situations that require our awareness in space include potential destruction caused by space debris, which also creates more space debris. So it's a compounding problem. Spacecraft collisions, anti-satellite weapons, potential nuclear weapons in space. Of these, which do you think presents the greatest immediate threat? Which is the greatest long-term threat? And are there other threats that I haven't mentioned other than lack of understanding of the space environment? Tatiana, we'll start with you, and then Senjuti, I'd like to get your perspective on this as well.
Oh, so I think those were a couple of questions in terms of other potential threats. I mean, there are threats like space weather, natural objects, that I think, and Senjuti could certainly speak to this more, with greater expertise than me, but that I think present complicating factors when you're dealing with space situational awareness, because they are potentially less predictable and have to be factored into how we're accounting for the movement of objects that we know where they are and can account for because we've put them there. So that's one issue. I think in addition to nuclear weapons, there's the possibility of other weapons, conventional weapons, being brought up into space. I think we'll get to this later on, but international law only strictly prohibits nuclear weapons in space, which means there's no real, at least international law, against using conventional weapons in space, which creates the possibility of weaponizing space. And that's particularly so, I think, when it comes to dual use technologies, like say lasers, which could have some innocuous uses up in space, but could also easily be weaponized. And monitoring that, and whether nation states or nation states partnering with commercial actors are using it for benign or military purposes, could be very difficult. From my perspective, I think the greatest immediate threat is space debris. It's just, there's so much of it up there, and there's only more being added, and we haven't come up with a great way to get rid of it yet. And so I think that's just, I'm not really a mathematician, but my understanding of the law of really big numbers is that eventually that will lead to a collision, and it'd be harder to prevent than some of these other things that we've been talking about.
Excellent. Senjuti, do your views run parallel with Tatiana's? And if so, maybe give us some more in-depth perspective on, especially the debris issue, since you're collecting that data and distributing it, talking about how the data is being used to avoid damage when there is such little cooperation, I guess, between people that could be colliding with each other.
Right. Thanks a lot. And yes, Jeff, I agree 100%, obviously, with Tatiana has said. And I think that was a fantastic answer. I think I'll just to maybe foot stamp on one of the things about the immediate threat, that yes, the greatest immediate threat right now is space debris. But space debris also comes from various events, right? There could be debris because something collided with another object and, unintentionally they collided, but then there could be a collision that's intentional, or something that was blown up intentionally, that's ASAP test that we talk about, or weaponizing space that Tatiana also mentioned. So for me, just to wrap it up and structure it that way, an immediate threat is, yes, space debris. We also saw that because of space debris, like there have been several collision avoidances that have happened. Like for instance, I think this year there were about 500 that Starlink itself tried to maneuver around. These are like roughly what have been calculated. Obviously, I don't think like Starlink has ever come out and publicly stated that anywhere, but like those are the sorts of numbers that we are seeing, and those numbers are growing exponentially. So Starlink is just one of them, and then obviously there's like OneWeb, and then we see like instances where the Chinese upper stage rocket blew up, which created like thousands of debris pieces. Then that led to an effect where the ISS, the International Space Station, was at risk. So the astronauts had to go and take harbor somewhere to, feel like more safe. And then not because of that, but like separately, just this year, we also saw like there were debris pieces that were falling onto Earth that I sort of like put in the immediate threat. Yes, when it happens, it's immediate threat, but these things are going to multiply over time. And one of the recent examples is, like I think it was an ISS piece that came and fell on like a Florida farmer's house. So that's where like Tatiana's expertise comes in, that, whether that person is going to be compensated and how much liability is there for like which country to like compensate for that person and all the risk to their life and damages that they have gone through. One thing that I did want to add on is the emerging threats. And for me, one of the emerging threats also comes from like cybersecurity threats, from like jamming, spoofing, hackers targeting satellites for espionage or disruption. And that for me is one of the emerging threats, and extremely critical and disruptive and very concerning. I think we also saw one of these instances to have played out during the Ukraine-Russia conflict with Viasat cyber attack, where all of those were disrupted and there was a blackout. So that's very real too. And yeah, to sum it up, that would be my 2 cents on this.
Thank you so much, Senjuti. It's clear from our audience that they want more of an understanding of the policy that kind of drives this discussion. So I'll jump forward to that, because on my list of questions, I ask, how does space policy drive SSA? And so I'll go through some examples here, audience questions. One question is, why have a few countries been violating the regulations that United Nations Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Committee have put in place for decades, and how can they be kept responsible, or how do we enforce those laws? Let's just go through these and try to give people an understanding. Who wants to tackle that one first? You want to go, Tatiana?
Sure. I can kick us off, and then Professor Mallick can add anything that she thinks would be helpful and relevant. So, I think this really gets to a fascinating international law and policy issue, which is, why do countries comply with international law at all? And the root of the problem is that a lot of international law is pretty toothless. There are not great enforcement mechanisms. There is no international police body that can kind of bring to bear the sort of police apparatus of the state when it comes to domestic laws and ensuring that individuals and entities comply with their laws domestically. So a lot of, the thinking around this, the philosophy around this, is that states tend to be more compliant with international laws when they participate in their creation, because then they see those laws as legitimate. They also tend to be more compliant with international laws when it's in their self-interest to be compliant with those international laws, which can be a little bit, tautological, a little bit of like chicken and egg. But I think what this, like, one example of countries not necessarily complying is that we keep seeing ASAT weapons being deployed and tested, even though that's definitely not allowed under international law. And why do countries keep doing it? Well, because they don't believe that Other nations are only using space and their activities in space for benign purposes. And they want to ensure that in the event that, say the United States decides they are going to use our satellite capabilities for some nefarious military purpose, Russia or China wants to know, well, we can knock out those satellites. We have the technology available to do so. That does not give a great answer to how we can ensure compliance with these rules. But I think one element is, and we sort of saw this with the nuclear test ban treaties and other nuclear weapons ban treaties, states have to get to a place where they've decided that the risks of weaponizing space are worse than the risks of not weaponizing space. And I just don't know that we're quite there yet. And part of why I don't think we're there yet is I think governments are still unsure about all the ways in which they could weaponize space, all the different possibilities that are out there, and they don't want to regulate it yet. They don't want to limit themselves from defensive strategies or defensive weapons that they might be able to use. But what we could do, what has proven effective in other sectors, is having some sort of meaningful economic sanction or economic teeth behind non-compliance with international laws. So one of the reasons why the World Trade Organization is so successful is that it can impose economic sanctions on countries who do not comply with its orders. So if we could devise a system in which there were some sort of sanctions or economic effect that states would feel for non-compliance with the UN committee or with other international rules governing space, then maybe you would start to see more compliance because the costs of violating the rules would be greater than the costs of non-compliance.
Thank you so much. Senjuti, what do you think of economic sanctions as teeth for international space law? Do you think that's the solution? Do you think that's what gets everybody?
Well, I certainly think that it is one of the solutions, but it cannot, in my opinion, I think it has played out in several sectors and it leads to a lot of tensions, of course. But some of the other solutions that I think that could potentially work. And again, none of these solutions are supposed to be happening in watertight compartments. Everything needs to be running parallelly, and that's only where we reach that real equilibrium or that utopian place where we think that nations are going to actually be held responsible and they themselves will feel accountable for actions that they've had. Just looking at it from just geopolitical standpoint or from international relations, I think a lot of international law is several national interests, competing national interests trying to come on the same platform. And at this stage, achieving a consensus is extremely challenging. This is something that we all must actually understand. Despite that, I think that I'm not that much of a pessimist here. I do feel that even if it's a UN and several nations have signed on to it, but another thing to understand is that there's a difference in you may be a signatory but you haven't ratified it, so there's nothing that's holding you accountable for your actions. However, the positive in me thinks that there are several things that have happened when nations do ratify to the UN Corpus or the International Space Treaty. Sorry, the Space Treaty that we know of 1967. And some of the examples, I think the US has some of them, and that's the Zero Debris Charter that came about. That was actually just companies coming together, and right now there are about 100 companies and 12 countries that have said that, well, we by 2030 we're going to ensure that there's going to be zero debris. Or for that matter, where the US has come out with the FCC has come out with a law that national law that by 5 years the satellite needs to be deorbited. Or that there's a space situational awareness document that the Office of Space Commerce has. So these are things that also need to happen. So countries need to be proactive in building these regulations, putting them into effect, and that's how more accountability will come. Because just by saying and putting it on the UN, I don't think the best practices are going to get implemented. Although I will give like a lot of weightage to everything that the UN has done and all the other, organizations such as Space Safety Coalition, they have like norms of behavior and best practices. Then there is the UN Corpus's what's it called? The sustainability, the SDGs, like the guidelines for long-term sustainability of outer space activities. These are there and they exist and they've existed for several years, but the implementation of it sometimes falls through because countries don't want to accept to it. But another big example is like SPD3 that the US came out with, right? And the government it outlines comprehensive approaches to managing space traffic. And these are a country taking it up and leading it by example. It only just like alludes to the fact that several states need to come together and take it forward to make it more effective. Over, Jeff.
Absolutely. I want to keep with the audience questions because they're thinking globally with some of these questions, and that's a great place to start, right? Because we'll get to the U.S. government in just a moment. But another attendee puts forward this futuristic scenario where multiple space stations are in orbit producing commercial products for Earth, and there's a dispute between space stations. So this is, legal disputes in space. What type of law enforcement organizations, now we're talking about policing, would you envision to resolve this dispute? Would it be like a Space Guard type organization or an Interpol type organization or other government commercial organizations? We could do a whole hour on this, but let's like policing in space, enforcing dispute laws, not just in a courtroom. Tatiana, what do you think happens here?
So as an initial and very important matter, this would be a great premise for a sci-fi series, and I hope someone is writing it. Setting that aside, I think that policing in space, and this gets to what I was alluding to earlier, raises a whole litany of questions about jurisdiction and who has jurisdiction in space. The answer is everyone and therefore no one, because space is the common heritage of all mankind. I think the most practical, I can think of two practical solutions. One hypothetical would be that you do have, and Senjuti was alluding to this in her earlier answer about how do we get compliance, is having companies who are invested in space and operating in space actually come together and kind of come up with a framework to police themselves. So a private security force that is, funded by the companies that are actually engaging in these issues in space and want to ensure that there's a presence to safeguard their assets up there. That could be one method of doing it. The other one I would be inclined to see is a type of Interpol or United Nations, like a more global, force. I don't know that we ever want to be in a situation where one nation is responsible for policing space instead of having that be a shared endeavor if we are going to take seriously the idea of space as a common heritage for all peoples and all mankind, because that could very quickly devolve into one country actually being responsible for that what is now a common heritage. The policing issue, I think, is a separate issue from the judicial question of, which courts would actually have authority to hear the case in the event that there was a dispute between those two space stations. When you have a dispute that arises out of a contract, it can be pretty easy to solve for these jurisdictional questions. And I hope everyone who is involved in this takes all proper care to ensure that there is a choice of law and a choice of forum provision in those contracts. We are still working out in the US courts the appropriate jurisdictional rulings for cyber threats and internet issues. So I don't know that, we're ready to also be delving into who has jurisdiction over things that occur in space, it's better to just bake that right in. But if it's a tort or a crime, which court is going to end up having jurisdiction over that? I think we can take some guidance from the space treaty, which suggests that the claim would have to be the claim of a private citizen would have to be adopted by its country and then negotiated between two countries. And I think we're going to get to this question later probably, so I don't want to dive in too deep, but I think that's one of the policies that really needs addressing as a matter of priority is what are the protections for private actors in space? Because right now I think they're really wanting.
Absolutely. Senjuti, what are your thoughts here? First of all, I mean, what an amazing time to be a lawyer, and also like in space law where you have to think at this level. You think about like, and this all ties back to why SSA is so important. Think about how hard it is to police both international oceans and the internet. Like use those two examples, and then think of how big space is, right? And then you multiply the scope of the problem, and just being aware of what's happening is a miracle that we're able to even be aware of what's happening when we don't even know what's happening on most of our oceans. But Senjuti, like, what are your thoughts on the sort of policing once violations are detected? What kind of body handles those situations?
Yeah. So my 2 cents here is that I very much liked Tatiana's response to it, and I think just a little bit of color commentary there for me from my side is that I see it more like as being a multi-pronged regime where there would be something that's akin to a UN, right, where that's like a global state, nations and their heads or their representatives come together. But we all know like what's happening in the UN, and again, to like put something in context, that there's obviously the Paros Agreement, which is there for prevention of armed race in space, and that was mostly going through, except that one nation decided to veto it, and that just fell through. So like these sorts of situations may arise, and which is why just having like one sort of a UN may not be the answer to it. So maybe we have like a UN, and then the other thing that I really like that Tatiana also said, maybe like the commercial industry, right? Like in an industry association, if not an association, there's some sort of a body that comes together to monitor or coordinate activities that are happening to avoid any sort of disruptions that can happen in space would make a lot of sense for space to be more coordinated in a way that it doesn't end up being harmful. And when it comes to policing, I was like, yes, I think we'll just have to draft up laws as to, is this activity going to be termed as, like how we have penal codes everywhere, that is that activity in space going to fall under the penal code? And once that happens, then there's obviously going to be another agency that's going to be formed that'll like do something towards policing, or something that's like in a more criminal or tortuous manner, whichever that goes.
Yeah. So to summarize, before we go back to SSA and capabilities, what the United States is doing, to summarize, there needs to be global level policy. There needs to be global level baseline understanding that's been updated, and it's most likely has to be its enforcements and it have to be based on economics, right? Like, and this is an opportunity for like commercial industries, not just from the US, but all over the world, to say, this is how we could benefit from not blowing our satellites up each other. This is how we could benefit from actually just making money in space versus investing in an industry to blow up each other's satellites. And have that be have economics, the GDP be like the motivation, the enforcement here. Like that's probably the best route, right? Let's all make money instead of blow each other up.
Yeah.
That's probably like the most real in this climate. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what happens in 10 years?
I think so.
But,
I think on that note, commercial actors again have a legitimate role to play because there's the threat of economic sanctions, and a point that Senjuti made that I absolutely agree with. This everything runs in parallel. We can't have a single solution to anything, but commercial actors really can have a role to play and be like, governments, we don't want you, like they can be putting pressure on their governments and saying, we don't want you weaponizing space. You're going to mess it up for all of us. So that's, the other way to approach it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And somewhere, sorry, just like one other quick pin to that is like somewhere the whole aspect of the narrative that, space is only for national security. I know that it's like changing. It's changed significantly for several nations, but then for several other nations, it's still that watertight compartment that it's only for national security. But I think the greater challenge is to come out of that mindset and be like, it's for commerce, it's for scientific reasons, it's for exploration, is also critical in then making it, as you very rightly said, right, that we want to just have space as something that's going to lead to our progress. And we need to ensure that, nothing comes in the way to that progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so quite a few people in the audience have asked about space situational awareness. Is there a market here? Well, why, yes, there is, because the United States, like other spacefaring nations, are going to rely on the commercial sector to develop the solution. So, Senjuti, I'll start with you. What significant steps has the U.S. government, which is technically the largest space end user in the world, and its allies, what have they taken so far to expand SSA capabilities to protect commercial interests in space? And how is the government invested in the private sector? Let's start there. Where's the market?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. That's a very small question, right? But okay, so the U.S. has the U.S. has done it through several. They've prioritized SSA in several initiatives. One that I'll start with is the DoD. So it has initiatives like the spacecraft.org, which provides orbital data to commercial and international stakeholders. And then the DoD also then established the Space Systems Command, the Space Command and the Space Force, which also reinforced SSA as a national priority. In the past 2 years, the DOC has done something that's called the Consolidated Pathfinder, which is basically an initiative that is the goal of which is to provide basic SSA data and services to civil and private space operators, and they've also already started delivering spaceflight safety capabilities, and COMSPOC has also been a part of it. Allied to these collaborations, I think some of the things that I would say that the U.S. has also done really well is the U.S.-led combined space operations, which would involve the Quad, which would involve Canada, UK, Australia, all these nations, in addition to also having collaborations with the EUSST, which is the EU's wing of SSA capabilities. And the goal is to be aligning the European SSA capabilities with US initiatives. Coming to the point that you made about private sector investments, yes, I think that the US, through these efforts and collaborations, has certainly invested in the private sector, and that's how they've come about. The Space Force has also partnered with SSA firms to expand orbital tracking beyond the traditional methods. We also see something known as the Track 1.5 dialogues that happen, which is, these are dialogues or conversations between government, which is a mix of governmental and commercial entities that come together and are talking or are trying to collaborate and discuss what are the best strategies to move forward with. And this is where the government brings in all the private sectors, especially it definitely happens for the SSA world. And I am very sure that it happens for all the other space affiliated sectors as well.
Okay, and thank you so much, Senjuti. Tatiana, I'll throw that question to you, but also want to add, we've got a new presidential administration coming in. What are these future investments are likely in SSA with the incoming administration, and specifically factoring in now Elon Musk, who is, has so much at stake here in space, having so much influence now on potential influence here on budget. If we look historically at the first Trump administration, I mean, they were very aggressive on space development. I mean, established the Space Force and brought back the National Space Council. So, I mean, is this a good time to start proposing some big changes, big ideas in SSA?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think I find Trump a little hard to predict. But I do think that it is probably a good time. There's someone who has his ear, who does have a deep understanding of the issues involved, and who has a clear vision for the economic and environmental and national security potentials in space. And so I do think that we can expect to see this administration being very open to probably innovative ideas and ideas that are pitched, particularly as geopolitically or national security significant. Like, these are ways to position ourselves to be competitive with China. Like, we have to be making these investments or we're not going to maintain an edge. So I think that those are, two ways in which we might see it manifested. I think also, some things that have been particularly frustrating to SpaceX, to Elon Musk, and to companies that rely on his, or who hope to rely on his rockets to get their own products up into space, is the slowness with which the FAA has been acting in terms of providing licenses for exit and reentry over the United States. And I would defer to Senjuti on this, but I can only imagine that having a better understanding of what is up in space, having that space situational awareness, and giving whatever agency, if it continues to be the FAA, if we create a new space agency, as I know some have been suggesting in the industry, would be really useful. But if they had more confidence in what's up there and how to deal with the threats from everything that's orbiting the Earth, that might facilitate getting those licenses for entry and re-entry and exit.
Just very quickly, just to add to that, the reason I brought up Elon Musk is that, he is also a major competitor, right, of all of these other people who are creating these technologies. Are you worried that his involvement in some of these decisions may cause things to slow down a bit, because you may have competitors like saying, oh, well, we were unjustly evaluated as a viable solution here? I'm just curious if you see lawsuits between companies slowing things down. I
mean, I would never want to imply that there's any hint of cronyism in the upcoming administration or anything like that. But I do think we've been touching on, I think, throughout this conversation, the sort of lack of clarity in terms of the rules that govern particularly private actors in space. There are some pretty amorphous and relatively toothless rules to govern countries, but I mean, almost nothing when it comes to private actors, at least at the international level. Nature abhors a vacuum. So I think what you really see is kind of a regulatory vacuum, and there can be some good things that come of that chaos. Like, it allows innovation, it allows creativity, it lowers the costs for companies who are engaging in like various activities in space. But there can be some bad things that come with that too. And one of those bad things is it creates the potential for a strongman to come in and sort of dictate what the rules are going to be, just by virtue of being biggest and first and kind of taking up a lot of space. And so I wouldn't be, surprised whether it's SpaceX and Elon Musk or one of the other major players, if we start to see that, whether it's because of Musk's relationship with the Trump administration or just by virtue of the fact that there isn't necessarily a sufficiently robust regulatory framework in place, that we start to see some of the major players trying to elbow out their competition by using their greater presence to establish rules, or even if not binding rules, establishing precedent and practices that are more beneficial to them than to others.
Senjuti, what's your perspective from what are your thoughts from your perspective providing like SSA services?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so from like a commercial SSA provider standpoint, I think what we're seeing is that with the new administration and Trump obviously like coming in, he has with Musk, who has come in, and he's like a key figure with commercial space ambitions, right? So we definitely expect that space exploration and defense budgets are going to prioritize SSA. To what extent are they going to involve the commercial industry? We want to be hopeful about it because, Musk is also coming from the industry, but whether that's going to become like a competition and he's going to eliminate others, that's just like time will tell. So want to be very hopeful about that. One of my positive approach to this is that we have for a really long time grappled with, at least in the SSA industry, with the whole approach of like crawl, walk, and run, except that things have been so slow. So like speaking to something that Tatiana also said, like the entire process has been like really slow, so much so that we say it's just been like crawl approach. But we expect that, with this administration and like Musk coming in as well, since he's from the commercial world himself, it's time. It's like, in fact, it's way beyond time, that it should be like the run approach where we actually prioritize and make SSA capability robust in a way that it's not just with the government, and like all the industrial players have a good stake in it themselves, because their products are honestly like really superior at this point.
I do want to go, before we continue, I want to go to our audience questions here, because there was a really good question here about debris removal. Because we talked about debris as one of the threats that really warrants SSA, but this question is asking, how do we justify investments in active debris removal when the incidents of collision seem not to warrant action? And the same person asked, how do we create a market that attracts investors to back research and development and customers to use those services? So, the question here, the question here is like, first of all, our active debris removal, is it difficult to convince people to adopt these services because the consequences haven't really been seen to a certain level? I mean, what are your thoughts on when you hear that statement, Tatiana?
So I would say, I think human nature, right, is to sort of have a near-term perspective, short-term, like be incentivized by what we see as the most immediate short-term risks and gain and benefits. And I do think that it can be problematic that we have it, despite the fact that people have been warning about it, and we say like, well, there's just a lot of stuff up there and eventually this is going to happen. And that we start to see issues like when China tried to shoot down its satellite and ended up creating this massive cloud of debris. I do think that creates that has an impact on the way that companies and individuals within those companies think about prioritizing their investments and how they want to spend money and where they see the risks and what they want to lobby the government to be, investing in. That said, I think increasingly, and Senjuti alluded to this, the zero debris charter, I think increasingly the private actors are seeing that the amount of space debris is a problem and that it needs to be addressed. And so there is a desire from the commercial side to start figuring out better ways to eliminate that space debris. And I think the government, to the question of how do we try and attract investment to back R&D in this space, that's where the government can really come in, right, and create a short-term incentive for what may be a longer-term objective and say, we're going to be, investing, we're going to be putting out grants or backing companies that are trying to work on what we see as a really significant issue. And the initial kind of seed type money from the government can really be a great way to attract private investments into those same areas.
Senjuti, what are your thoughts? There's been a lot of R&D in debris removal, and there's been a lot of startups that have made space debris removal their pitch that this is a global business with a profitable future. What are your thoughts on that? And also just like the thought that the health of SSA as a market for entrepreneurs itself. What are some of the capabilities you see out there that are worth investing?
Absolutely. I'm looking at the question that came in. I think my answer here is that the fact that we have around 120 million plus objects in space definitely warrants a situation where there needs to be an active removal of debris pieces. Yes, we are not in a situation that any of that has led to a scenario where we face blackouts. But think about it this way: which day can you actually think of your life one day if you do not have internet connectivity, or you are unable to figure out where your flight timings are going to be just because one satellite got eradicated from space. And that situation can happen because one debris piece, however small, can come and hit a satellite and just conk it off. These things, of course, we're talking about it, and it hasn't happened to this extremity yet. But the fact that even just this year already, some 50,000 times Starlink had to maneuver their satellites because the debris was going to come and hit them, makes the situation really live and close to reality, that if we were not to do something about the debris and start removing it already, we are significantly behind. So I think that this is the situation. The facts and figures, really, the numbers talk to and justify why the investment in the area really needs to happen. Because even though are we going to wait for an incident as bad to happen for us to really start then churning the wheels and saying that, hey, this is now the solution that I'm going to prevent to something that's already happened? Can we actually do something retroactively? The simple answer is no. Shouldn't we try to be more cautious about it from the get-go? And tying that to what you just asked about SSA, yes, I think it clearly also brings to space traffic coordination, space traffic management, and SSA, and having these robust capabilities, because that's what is going to allow you to have seamless operations in space. Because otherwise, you'll be spending way more money in trying to fix a satellite and building more satellites than letting one satellite just blow up, or securing it. If you were to just keep it more secure, isn't that more sustainable, that you would be spending millions of more dollars to build more? And then also imagine everything that's on Earth that's going to get hampered because you lost signal for an entire day, just 24 hours, 1 hour, your national security, your banking. So all of this, economics, everything gets tied to this. And I think there's one more thing you asked, Jack. About where promising sectors. I would say obviously companies like COMSPOC, that are doing SSA and enhancing the SSA platforms for stakeholders across the board. And any sort of where you can take any sort of data and put it in, and it can be commercial, it can be the industry, it can be private, however you would like it, right? And then there is the AI ML market, that you are able to take that and use radar services to track debris pieces that are up to or smaller than 2 centimeters. I think that's a huge win for the industry, or just in general, because those small debris pieces, it's really hard to track them. ADR is another one of them. And I think one of the other things that I would say would be, the advanced radar systems that will be able to capture and prevent more collisions from happening.
Thank you so much. I looked over here at the time, and already an hour has gone by, and we're close to the end here. And so just to summarize, I think what we've established here is that space situational awareness can be a profitable and a valuable tool for everybody in an environment that's not weaponized, compared to weaponized space, in which we're just creating and elevating risk in space to the point where it becomes expensive for everybody to operate in space just completely. To get to that point, it needs to be backed by some global understanding, an updated policy, which is enforceable through economic means, but also creates economic benefits. If you follow it, there are economic benefits to this. That's probably what's going to bring everybody to the table. And then also the commercial space industry can really take the lead here and be influential by explaining and communicating what those economic benefits are, like what the future space economy is, like how this creates jobs and economic growth, and can help, tell their governments, like, this is how much more we could bring in if we don't have to worry about anti-satellite weapons in space. Like, this is how much better it is for us. We've also established that if you are thinking about going into law, get into space, right? Because we need a lot of expertise. Like, we need a lot. This is a big, huge issue. SSA is a fantastic technological tool that can provide us with the data that we need to make critical decisions, but we need people to establish precedent that is productive for everybody and protects investments. I hope is that what we've been able to cover in this 1 hour to some level.
I think that's a fantastic summary of the key points and the key takeaways.
Yes, absolutely, Jeff. And I think you did a fabulous job of just summarizing it.
And we could talk about this for hours, and we can go into each one of these topics for hours, and we will eventually. But Senjuti, Tatiana, thank you both so much for joining us for this discussion. Thank you all in the audience for being here with us, and also thank you to Kepler Communications for sponsoring Future Space Economy this year. This is our last episode of the year. We'll pick up again next year at the Satellite Show in March. So to all of you, have a happy end of the year and happy new year. And we'll see you for episode 17 in March at Satellite. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.